Hi, my name is Dave Tamelo. I'm a BigFix technical advisor based in the Chicago area. I've been working with BigFix for about 10 years now. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to scan the QR code on the screen. In the previous video, we discussed how BigFix gets content from the internet when an endpoint needs a payload as part of a deployment action. That's not the only option, though. Non-Windows endpoints can be configured to pull content from local repositories rather than from the internet. Configuring endpoints this way is handled through a client setting applied by a fixler. Each non-Windows OS that supports custom repositories has a specific client setting. There are two key points related to local repositories that are important to remember. First, if you configure an endpoint to use a local repository, then that's the only place it looks for content. So unlike the default deployment scenario we talked about in the last video, if the custom repository setting is applied, BigFix will not use the URL embedded in the prefetch statement, and it will not go out to the internet to get the payload. Instead, it will look to a local repository, and if the payload is there, it will retrieve it and deliver it out. If the payload is not there, the action will fail. Second, the repository management tools BigFix provides are only for managing the configuration files of existing repositories. BigFix does not provide a method of creating the repositories. It only works with existing ones. Also, even though the custom repositories may be used to deliver the content, you still need to register the appropriate OS download plugin on the BigFix server. So that being said, let's look at how local repositories can be leveraged in BigFix. BigFix provides custom repository dashboards for CentOS, Oracle Enterprise Linux, Red Hat, SUSE, and Ubuntu. If you don't see them in the All Dashboards view, be sure to enable the patching support site and subscribe endpoints to it. The dashboards are used to manage the configuration files associated with the different software packaging tools. Using the dashboards, you can either create and deploy the config files that represent any repositories you may have available, or you can import existing config files in your environment that are tied to enabled repositories. Each of the custom repository dashboards has a specific analysis that monitors the appropriate configuration directory for the operating system. Be sure to activate the ones that you need. For the sake of this discussion, we'll focus on the Red Hat custom repository dashboard, as all of the different dashboards function basically the same way. Once the repository analysis is activated, when you go into the repository dashboard, you'll see a split screen. The top half of the screen lists the available endpoints, and the column on the far right indicates if they have any repositories configured based on what's in etc yum.repos.d. If you select an endpoint that shows one or more repos, as I've done here, the bottom half of the screen will show the repo information. If the repo name shows unspecified, that means the analysis found an existing repo config file on that endpoint with the configuration setting enabled. At the top of the dashboard, there are two tabs: Endpoints, where we're at now, and Repositories. You use the Repositories tab to add any configuration files you want to deploy, or to import any existing repository files found by the analysis for the dashboard. If you click on Add, you can provide information for a local repository you want to use, or in the case of Red Hat, a satellite that you may have deployed that you still want to use for content delivery. If you want to use the satellite, you have to provide the satellite URL and the bootstrap URL. The dashboard only points to the bootstrap. You would manage the channels the endpoints use through the satellite server itself. In the case of adding a local repository, you can give it a name to make it easy to recognize and provide the URL to the repository as shown here. Remember that you are responsible for building and maintaining the repo. The dashboard simply provides a way to manage the config files associated with your repo. If any existing configuration files were found, you can use the import button to name them and make them available to deploy to other endpoints as needed. Once you've set up your repository information, you can assign the repositories from the Endpoints tab. You can select one or more endpoints to assign repositories to, and click the Register a New Repository button. Select the repository to deploy, and click Next. On this screen, you can provide any additional configuration fields you need included, like GPG check equals 0 if the packages in your repo aren't signed. You can add multiple fields as needed, one per line. When you're finished, click Save. This will initiate an action to build and deploy the repo config files on the targeted endpoints. If you want any endpoints to use more than one repository, you simply repeat the process for registering the other repositories as needed. Once the action completes to deploy the repository configuration file to the targeted endpoints, those endpoints will now only look to those repositories for their content. The BigFix server will no longer attempt to download content from the internet for those repositories. If you want to remove a registered repository from an endpoint, simply click the endpoint on the dashboard and select the Unregister Repository button. You'll select the repository to unregister, and this will initiate an action to remove it from the endpoint. If there's more than one repo configuration file you want to remove, simply repeat the process for each. And if you want an endpoint to go back to using the BigFix server to retrieve content directly from the vendor instead, use the Disable Custom Repository Support fixlet to turn off the use of custom repositories. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you need more information about this topic or BigFix in general, you can find help at these links. Have a great day.